Everyone, thank you for joining our session. I hope you got some refreshments downstairs, and thank you so much for attending today. My name is Orie. I'm a doctoral student at the Department of Instruction. I'm very fortunate to be part of this wonderful collective team here, and this will be a portion of all of our members. So Mr. Massey over here is from Lakeland High School. Sam Maki is from the LDF, Flambeau Nation. Morgan Mayer-Jochimsen is here, a graduate student here as well. And we have Fred Maulson from the Flambeau Nation and LUHS, and also Aaron Berger. Also from the research team that will be recording. So with that, thanks again. Those were our partners. Our goals for the day. First, we're going to ground our historical context that led to the work. There's obviously a long history of some really bad relations and a lot of historical and cultural trauma surrounding Indigenous experiences in school. So we're going to spend some time there. And then we're going to share a process for collaboration and the inclusion of multiple perspectives, because that's really the strength of our project is diversity, engaging multiple stakeholders and partners across various contexts. And then we will provide an overview and outcomes of our work. So this is a 4-year project we'll talk more about. So a lot of things happening, and then we'll engage with your questions at the end. So you might have noticed and probably smelled. Thank you, Mr. Maulson, for joining us on the stage. This is how we opened up all of our collaborative meetings in the space, whether it be on tribal land, the public high school, even in the principal's office, or the library, places that probably hadn't seen a ton of this activity that would have been, penalized in the past if people were doing that. So just showing that having some faith in our cultural values and trust to be able to bring those into spaces that are traditionally white and not inclusive of Indigenous practices has been a great gift. So we wanted to share that with you this afternoon.
I'd first like to acknowledge the whole Chunk Nation, being that this is their home territory. So I appreciate and respect that they're allowing us to come down here. The things that you heard, I first said where I'm from, the Waskaganian, which is like the Flambeau, the Lakeland Flaming Torches. Then my Indian name is Baswewe, which is named the Echo Man. Many things that we are going to talk to hit home and cherish on all the hard work that we've done. And like we've Linda had mentioned, is that's how we open up these good talks, because many of you are new to this, and it's really interesting and to get your perspective, because what we do here is very important, because we have a different view and a different life up in the north. As you can see, I don't have my boots on today because this is the first time I can wear shoes. There's no snow that I don't have to trudge through. Just a joking way, but that's really good to be down here to experience and to share some of the things, good and bad, on what I encountered as a teenager. Be part of this program to acknowledge something that is very powerful for us as education. And our education is different. And I just like to share with you on different views and values of our culture and our communities that we have. Because a lot of people don't know what goes on in their north. It's a different story up there. And this is the story that we're going to tell you on a long journey of through COVID and so forth. So that's why we're here, to share these good thoughts and these good things, and to hear from you. And like I say, my dad said, you got to tell it like it is. Don't hold back, and you have to understand there is no wrong question or right answer. We all have to learn from everybody. So, Miigwech, I hope.
Touch more than what was said. So we introduce with smudging, it's a cultural practice that our ancestors have done for a very, very long time. It is said to be cleansing. So it's always nice to start in a new space by cleansing that space, everyone's minds and the space itself, to get everyone on an equal footing and off to the right foot. So that's why this is a practice that we introduced in our meetings and in those spaces.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Levi Massey. I'm an associate principal at Lakeland Union High School in Monaco, Wisconsin. the site of where the majority of our research has taken place with our staff and our students. And so as we go through this process today, I speak from the perspective of being a 5-year administrator in the district and having 10 years of background working with the Flambeau tribe and some of our students that we've gone through. You'll get a lot more of my story and my journey through this process as we go through, but I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the great work that we've been doing with our students and our staff.
Deacon, I've been at the school for about 7 years now, but my former job was a conservation chief, worked for the Great Lakes and Fish and Wildlife Conservation for 15 years. So I have a very lengthy background of working with several different tribes in the north, in different states.
Good afternoon. My name is Samantha Maki, as you can read there on the board in front of you. I am the director of the Flambeau Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians Tribal Education Department. So I work currently, I oversee the K through 12 interests of the tribe and our schools that our students attend. And so I advocate for and attempt to partner with and look out for the interests of our tribal students within those public education settings, as well as provide higher education support for our students attending higher education.
So again, we already introduced our team members. These are some of the folks that aren't here today. So this project started Indigenous Learning Lab from Dr. Aydin's work with creating the Learning Lab process, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. But he and Aaron Birdbear, who's here, are co-PIs for this project. And so basically, we were shopping around for a school that demonstrated a high degree of racial disproportionality in negative school outcomes like school dropout, poor grades, low test scores, high rates of suspension. And so unfortunately in Wisconsin, the landscape of education and disproportionality is pretty dire. It's pretty depressing, honestly. And so there were a variety of schools to choose from. Dr. Ball has done 5 or 6, I believe, learning labs in this area, and he wanted to expand this further and specifically to work with an Indigenous nation because that hadn't been done before in any of the prior learning labs. So we did some shopping, and we were really fortunate to find Lakeland Union High School, which met all of the characteristics, and also there had been a tremendous deal of work already done to make inroads, to make changes, to build better relationships with the tribal community. And also the tribe had recognized their efforts. There was an Eagle staff that had presented to the administrators and it's probably displayed in the office. The school had performed, held powwows there for community to gather. So there were a lot of conversations that had already been going on before we asked them to join this project. And so that's a tremendous, thanks to both communities for all of the groundwork that they had laid prior to our starting the project. Yeah, I'm the project coordinator. I've been with the project since for the past 4 years. Played various roles, except several hats. I was project assistant with Morgan. And also Tiana and Dosen were graduate students here, and they've since graduated and become professors at other institutions. So they did a lot of work with the earlier learning labs in this area. And then we have Morgan.
Hi everyone, my name is Morgan Mayer-Jochimsen. I'm a 4th-year student in educational policy studies, and I've been with the program have been with this project since it started when I was actually academic staff at UW-Madison, and being a part of this work inspired me to apply to the graduate school and get my PhD. So it's been very impactful to my journey. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Tanya, and I'm
All right, so the overarching project goal is to make system level changes so that our school better serves all students, not just particularly Native students. So this isn't seen as a one-dimensional, direction to intervene just with the Native students. Oh, this is a place of this, they need to be catered to, they need, changed in some way. Instead, this is a whole systemic change initiative to not only form this new partnership between the nation and various agencies that serve the tribal people, but also the school communities, teachers, administrators, students, parents. And then also this new behavior system, we'll talk more about it that was created is for the entire school. So the school dug deep, worked together across several years to develop something that's actually still in the works. It's implemented, but also always growing and changing and being responsive to the needs that arise, and also the little tweaks that can make it function even better and more sustainable.
All right. So as you heard right in that process, we were selected. We won the lottery to be a part of this. We won the lottery because we were bad at some of the things that we were doing, right? So it's not the great award to get, but in that process of going through this, there were significant pieces about who we are, who we were, who we want to be that led to us being selected for this research process. So when we go to the next slide, it's a question because the teacher in me comes out, right? That administration is just a process to support kids, but the teacher in me is the instructional piece. Is I want to interact with the audience a little bit in this process. So with somebody next to you, I want you to have some conversation about what a school means to you. When you think of school, what does that mean to you? I'm going to give you 30 seconds of just some partner conversation, shoulder and partner conversation, so we can feedback to that. Get out of the corner.
He wants to stand.
I don't
That's exactly right. That's exactly why I looked over there at the seats. I'm like, now because I cannot be like in the first. If I want to get up, I'm going to.
All right, so bring you back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. First and foremost, before I even engage in the conversation, what I could see on the faces of everybody here, there was not a lot of anger or resentment or ill intent in the conversations about school. I saw a lot of smiling. I saw a lot of joy in some of those conversations, right? When I think about that school experience, I looked at the same situation for myself, right? I grew up in a small rural community. Mom and dad were both in the home. My mom was an educator. She taught 6th through 8th grade science. My dad was a banker, worked in a bank. I had 2 sisters. I was sandwiched in the middle. My older sister was a valedictorian. My younger sister was a salutatorian. I was the one that finished 3rd in my class. So I was the black sheep of the family. But in that process, right, I had a mother who could get me into a school anytime I wanted. She had keys to the building. Mom, I want to go play basketball. Great. She could open the gym for me. I can go shoot. I was a student, even though I may not look like I was a student before the internet really existed. Right. So in order to do research, you had to go to the library. My mom could get me in the library. I could get any book. I could find access to any encyclopedia, right, that I needed, right, to get some information as we're going through. I look at all the inherent advantages that I had as a student, and I look at school and I say, that's a great place. School is a place that brought a lot of joy in my life. School is a place that brought a lot of opportunity in my life. The reason I bring that up, though, is that the vision of a school to me, right, isn't necessarily the same that the vision of a school was to the students in our community. And that's what we're going to slide to the next slide and talk about some of the historical context that ties into that.
This building here on the left is a government boarding school on the Flambeau Reservation, where we are from in northern Wisconsin. And you can see it was established in 1895. And we got that from the Historical Society. And then on the left-hand side is a current building that still stands. It was restored. And it acts as somewhat of a museum in the community. There's some office space in there. It still exists. You can drive up to Flambeau right now and check it out if you're interested. You'll see it in about 3.5 hours. The reason that we bring this up is because despite the fact that not a lot of Flambeau students went physically to this school, there are generations of Flambeau students that went to boarding school. And it's not quite as far away as it might feel like it is when you're talking about it as a historical concept. We are looking at parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, as most boarding schools didn't officially close until the 1960s and 70s, that went through a generation at least, if not more than one generation, of the boarding school experience. And the reason that most Lacta Flambeau students have never attended this school in particular was because they like to put you in schools that were far away from home because they knew it was a traumatic and miserable experience and they didn't want you to be able to run away and go straight home. So the pictures and pictures of students that attended the school were young Indigenous children from other reservations, while young Lacta Flambeau students were brought to other boarding schools in other locations. And this is the historical context that we work against in education with our students from our community. That we have families who this is their experience, the knowledge of that and that trauma of, you know, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, you know, the attempts at genocide and eradication that occurred in the building, you know, and I'm sure you're all somewhat familiar, if not, so I'm not going to dive deeply into that, but those scars, they still exist, and they exist in the parents and in the grandparents that the students that walk the halls of Lakeland Union High School today are still sitting at the table with and having dinner with and having conversations with. And so these are very current and very real issues today, and they absolutely impact the relationship that exists between the tribal students and Lakeland Union High School.
Kind of fast forward, but this also is entail of the trauma that our school, Lakeland Union High School, has gone through. The heart of the Indian the Walleye Wars in late 80s, early 90s. I was probably going into my freshman year, 8th grade, going into my years of high school that I went through that. That's my dad on the left there. One of the most hated men in Wisconsin at one time. He had a bounty on his head of over $50,000. Hurt my father. My dog was poisoned. My house was shot at. I was rocks thrown at me. One thing that really strikes me, and when I go to my classroom now, I work at the high school now. Right across from it is something traumatic that I still remember. That one night, multiple nights actually, but one night really struck me out is that I saw my own science teacher throwing rocks at me, calling me every name in the book, from the timber nigger to the wagon burner, spirit of squaw, save an Indian, and throwing rocks at me. And then the next day I had to go to his class. So imagine how, that's just my experience. So imagine the kids that I work with or the parents that I went to school and the trauma that we went through. We didn't have this type of activities and this relationship that we have now. And to imagine how that has amplified from the boarding schools to that, to now where we stand. It is a lengthy process to get involved with our high school, to be unified as a union. We're not a union. We as you're going to see this PowerPoint, we are trying our damnedest to get where we are in our community, and it's a struggle. But the only way we can do that is by education. We have to tell these horrific stories of trauma to make changes. And to have this opportunity, like I said earlier, is a great opportunity to show how the hatred is what it was up in the Northwoods. Now, has it changed? Some of it, but it's getting better through education.
So one of the things I would tell you is that through the training as an educator, right, we hear different words, we hear different buzzwords of things that are a popular topic in education, right? Trauma-informed care is a big deal right now, right? We're talking about how do we provide education, how to provide care to the students who come from backgrounds of trauma. It's great in a textbook, right? It's great in a PowerPoint presentation. It's great in a video that you can watch. But when you sit next to people who have experienced trauma, right, that changes your perspective of what trauma is. That changes your perspective of about informing or educating students of trauma backgrounds. So the trauma that we're talking about here, the boarding school era, there are still community members, right? I had a grandmother that sat in a meeting for her granddaughter, right, in our school, and talked about how her experience at the boarding school leads her to look differently at our school. Right? He talked about his experience of sitting there and seeing his teacher, whom he's supposed to respect and listen to and learn science from, who is slandering him and making threats to him the night before when he's practicing some of his cultural rights. So we look at this and we look at the context that's been set. The school setting for us right, is tumultuous because not all of our students approach that building with the same joy that I explained that I had approached it with at the beginning. So when we go to that next slide of it, one of the things to think of, right, in your process, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a turn and talk here, but is in your conversations, right, was a lot of this history a part of some of those conversations you were talking about? Was a lot of this history something that rises to the top about how education is deemed in the state of Wisconsin? We as a group, when we're talking about our notes and putting together pieces on here, right, one of the big things that came up was the idea of Act 31, okay? This isn't like a test you pass or fail, but how many of you are familiar with Act 31? Okay. Act 31 in the state of Wisconsin, legally schools are required to teach about Native American history, about the tribes and the people that lived in this state prior to it becoming even a state, teaching about the cultural practices, teaching about the background and the history. What we have found is that doesn't happen, right? I can tell you that I went to a school that didn't have a tribal population, and I can't tell you that we learned a ton about Native American culture. So when we go to this process, we look at the educational piece, that how can we connect some of these stories to the educational experience that our students have, and not necessarily even just for Native American students, but for all students with the backgrounds and the stories that come into play.
So our project I mentioned before is intensely collaborative, right? That's the whole point. That's our strength. And there's no way that any individual could, pull off a project like this, obviously. If you see here the slide we have, so we went the first year, we were assembling our team, our design team, to basically look at the old behavior response system and designing one. And we needed an intensely diverse group of stakeholders there. So we have a nice mix. And then of course, to not make the group too large, so that we function as well. And then we held monthly meetings, which got impacted by COVID. We'll mention a little later. And then, so COVID, we had a delay, we went on Zoom. But before we were making the journey up north and meeting on the tribal land first, which really was to the comfort of some of our LDF folks that see LUHS building as a site of trauma. So we wanted to, affirm those feelings and start there. And then our current team is a little similar, a little bit different. Some people have changed titles or roles within the building, but we have a lot of folks that have been with us since year one. And then the UW team is represented on the bottom. Like I mentioned, the first year was about designing a new system. So a lot of it was hearing stories. A lot of it was going through this trauma, having difficult, courageous conversations, like Mr. Maulson says. And to tell the truth, we had some administrators, we had some teachers, say and hear some difficult things, turn red maybe, when some of the tribal community members were really putting them to task and really kind of, testifying to their experience and kind of demanding change, looking at data in a different way. We have these the school provided beautiful data charts, but we had a community member say, hey, well, what does that look like disaggregated by race? Those are all great charts, but what does that mean for my Native population? And then COVID impacted us, so we had a little bit of a 2 to 3 year, 2 year implementation process where the building was closed, so we're preparing for implementation. And then of course the actual implementation, which is, like I mentioned before, is always kind of growing and changing based on just how it works in the building and elsewhere. And then we're in our sustained improvement phase where we're trying to kind of step back as a research team and just let all of the cogs in the wheel on the machine unfold and do the things that they're designed to do. So if you look in the bottom right corner, that's one of our first meetings where we asked the school to produce, what's their behavior plan. And there it was on one page, the blue rectangles, and it was basically focused on just the behavior. Was it a minor infraction? Was it a major infraction? And then the associated responses to those infractions. So it was all very focused on just like the bad behavior. And then we asked the administrators, well, who wrote this? Where did this come from? How was this developed? And they didn't really know. It just seemed like a document that had been passed down from principal to principal. So that's our beginning point. And then you see in the top, it's a good picture of one of our design sessions where we had students, parents, community members, administrators, teachers, UW people at the table on this equal level where we're not like, oh, the students' opinions, are just for show or something. But no, their ideas literally drove the project, right? Community members' ideas coming together to design solutions. And then the process circle that you see there is the task force process that Dr. Ball pioneered and brought to several schools down in Madison, and now with the Indigenous Learning Lab.
I'll just add on that too. So one of the things is the process that was brought. So as a school, we existed before the UW task force team came together to help us out, right? And so we had been engaging in a lot of this work in this process the entire time up to this. But it was the structure that helped us kind of go through with intention as to what we're trying to accomplish. We really needed to question who we were, what we were doing, what we were looking for in that process. And so in that, by questioning, creating some of those specific pieces of feedback and then analyzing what they meant and looking at where we were going from there, the structure made us think about what we were doing as a school in a different way. And that portion of it really is what has been a catalyst to some of the changes that you're going to see as we go through this in this learning lab process.
So the basis of the concepts that we tried to lead with or look at through the lens is traditional, our 7 grandfather teachings. So the 7 grandfather teachings, first is humility, or Debaden Disuin, bravery, Akwa Odeewin, honesty, Gwekwa Disuin, wisdom, Nibwa Kwawin, Nibwa Kawin. Yep, that was right. Sorry. Truth, Debwewin, respect, Minwa Dane Demowen, and love Zagidewin. And those are the traditional Ojibwe names for those grandfather teachings. And we root a lot of our things from parentage to schooling to everything in those core concepts, leadership. And so that was a driving force of consideration in the systems as we evaluated them between the tribe and the school.
So in the process there, like you said, a lot of intentionality, a lot of questions that came into play as we're going through this. One of the things that popped up for us was this concept of understanding that the way we looked at things, and I say we just generally as a school, it's a very vague term, right? But the way we looked at things and the traditional view that we would have thought was traditional from an education standpoint wasn't necessarily a traditional view of education for all of our students. So I want you to think of this and just formulate something in your head is, what is a classroom? How would you describe a classroom, right? You're doing a mental map. Somebody says, close your eyes and tell me, describe a classroom, right? You put that image into your mind, when you start to think about those things, I'm pretty certain that, you go next slide, that you're envisioning something similar to this, right? To this. Some desks, right? You have your chalkboard, maybe not a chalkboard anymore, right? You have your areas, your maps, the lights, there's a window, there's a door, there's something somewhere for the teacher to stand, right? And from the standpoint of what education represents in our country, this is the most common depiction that you're going to find people thinking about a classroom. But we have to challenge ourselves to think a little bit differently, because the classroom and the learning experience that we would consider the traditional classroom it was more modern than what the traditional classroom was for each of our students, especially our tribal students. I used that terminology before, and I talked about, I said I was raised in a home where my mom was a teacher. My mom was labeled as a profession as a teacher, right? But I lived across the driveway from my grandma, who had to stop going to school after 8th grade because her mother died, and she had to work on the farm and take care of things on the farm. My grandma was just as much of a teacher in my life because of the lessons that I learned in her home, the lessons that I learned from the back of her hand, the lessons that I learned, right, from the modeling that she did. And so I'd say my grandma would have never gotten the label or the salary, right, or the accolades of being a teacher. But that woman is forever etched in my heart as one of the greatest teachers that I ever had. So when we look at this, we look at the traditional classroom, and we've changed our viewpoint a little bit.
So basically, here's a classroom that I help teach and I co-teach with. Imagine yourself having an opportunity to visually and physically see something that's totally out of the norm. Now, granted, these every student's gone through probably 11 years, juniors and seniors, so 11 and 12 years schooling. To have this put on them on a regular basis was a very challenge. To this day, it's still challenging because they're defining what skills they have. What skills do they need to survive? It's not surviving just in the brick and mortar setting that we have this great building right here. It's surviving in the home skills of our and our teachings that are passed down to us. To visually see things that have made us. This area right here is a naturalist area that has probably the second generation pines in the northern Wisconsin. Burn marks from our ancestors where they used to burn the landscape so that they could hunt and gather the animals. So you don't have the underbrush. Those are scars that are there. But to teach that is a very challenging because we're struggling with what modern type of teaching that these kids have emplaced and embedded in us. And that's from the boarding schools. And that's the struggle that we have. And to break that barrier is a challenging infrastructure for us day to day. And then also technology. We all have phones in here, pretty much everybody. We all rely on them. That's our third arm or our third leg. We need to have that, but to break that barrier where this area had no cell service. We're like feeding friendly for a service. And that was the point of it, is that we want you to experience something that is natural. And granted, this was only a day class, but these are multiple days that we put in place for them to survive and have challenges. A lot of these kids have never experienced Madison, never experienced the big life. A lot of these kids may not go very far from the community, may venture off to maybe the service or maybe the college, but I would say at least 50 to 55%, even more, come back to our communities to represent us, to live there. So I mean, think about that, and that's what we're trying to teach these kids here, that we want them to experience something out of the norm that they haven't seen in their career as.
One of the things in one of our professional developments, a good friend of ours that has worked through kind of incorporating cultural practices into our education, Mr. Ricky White had told us that our students hear first, and they see, and then they do, and then they don't, right? And so this process for us is having a classroom in which you are experiencing the tangible education right in front of you, as opposed to sitting there having somebody speak it to you and without any other pieces to it. Not just reserved for our Native American students, but for all of our students. Ricky's statement he always says to our staff anytime he's around is, what's good for Native students is good for all students. And it's opened the eyes to our teachers, to our staff members, that what we're doing is going to be great for all of our students, but we have an intentionality about focusing on what we can do to help support just our Indigenous students in the classrooms. So it's a huge growth for our school.
So to kind of showcase the systemic change, kind of the higher level, I guess, more academic picture ideas. Does anyone offhand know which department of the U.S. government created boarding schools, or who did? Obviously, the government funded them.
Department of War.
U.S. War Department. So education, public boarding school education, and later public education, which grew out of boarding schools on the frontier, were an act of war, right? Forced assimilation. You can't speak your language. Let's cut your hair. Let's put you in white man's clothes. Let's clean you up. Let's make you a firm citizen who might be a property owner one day, who might be worth something to this country one day, right? So to get away from that, and this is decades, this is generations, okay? And this does equate to some of these things are happening in public schools, right, that are publicly funded, and maybe they're not called this, right? Like it's just, oh, that's just school. That's just a picture of the nice neat rows in the classes and the teacher in front of everyone telling everyone what they know and what they need to know. And so kind of the big picture items here on the left, this isn't just unique to something that at Lakeland or in the Northwoods nationwide, right? This is a legacy of our American history. Through Indigenous Learning Lab, and of course, all of the work that had been done already by the school and the tribal, like the Flambeau Nation, we're looking at flipping these on their heads, right? Changing this, decolonizing, right? So instead of forced assimilation, integrating the culture, right? Allowing for, Ojibwe language and culture to be taught directly in the school to affirm Act 31, right? That we talked about earlier. Affirming and building tribal sovereignty, not just sees kids as discrete individuals. Oh, this one's good at school, this one's not so good, this one comes from a bad home, this one's a good home. But no, affirming the whole history and our legacy as a tribal people. So building that sovereignty, promoting collectives, like I mentioned. This I don't know if we mentioned this, the UHS's population is about 20-25% from Lac de Flambeau. So when I was a Native kid in Green Bay Public Schools, I was just one of a handful of huge schools. We were never assembled as a group. We were never affirmed. I don't recall any integration being done throughout my public education, except for there was like one lesson in 4th grade. But so moving from the reactive discipline to being proactive, to recognizing this is a relationship. Behavior isn't just a response, it's also a relationship. And to prevent negative interactions by building these relationships and improving communication, not just with the student, but with the parents. And also changing from deficit-based, like, oh, that kid, is just not cut out for this, to being asset-based. Like, what is the knowledge that you bring to the classroom? Like, speak your language, teach us. And also dealing with this historical reckoning, right? So not hiding from it, not trying to, placate everyone and, oh, everything's so much better now. And, oh, we're so diverse, everything's great. But no, this isn't an end point, right? This is a process because we have hundreds of years of colonization to deal with and assimilation.
So one of the things that I struggle with, I guess, the most as an administrator in school is the theoretical approach to everything and the lack of action. All right, the lack of concrete, we're getting stuff done. These pieces on here, and we'll speak to each of these as we go through, are actual changes in our school that have come about because of our approach, because of our process, because of the work that's been done of the collaborative group. And when we look at this, right, and we look at the things that we're seeing from this is the impacts have been felt now, right, in the first initial year and a half of doing some of these things, but these impacts are going to have greater weight as we move forward because we're going to see this becoming more of the norm in our school system. So if you look at some of the things, and Fred will highlight on the Voyager program a little bit more in depth as we move forward, and I'll highlight on the We Care values as we move forward a little bit. But one of the things, culturally responsive attendance codes, right? In our school setting, in our school system, we've said that we value cultural activities. We value some of the things that our students have been entitled through their rights, right? As members of the sovereign nation. But what does that mean? Well, we'll have students that will come to us during the fishing season and say that we're going to be out spearing tonight. And that would be something that doesn't fit the typical white person's way of looking at fishing. Fishing happens during the daytime when it's nice out going on, right? But for our tribal students, the spearing season happens at nighttime with lights, right? But Waswagani, right? Lac de Flambeau, the Lake of the Flaming Torches. Where does that come from? That comes from our traditional ancestors that were sitting there with their torches looking for fish, right, at the nighttime. So when our students are out in that process, they would come to school the next day and they'd fall asleep in class. Well, I'm trying to teach you about whatever, right? Let's go, wake up. We got class going on here. This is important. But the traditional way of life that has sustained the people of that community for such a long time is more valuable to those students than whatever lesson we were going through in that moment was. And so as we started to recognize some of these pieces, we decided we had to do something to honor that. And so we told our students, you could take those days off. If you need to take days off, if you need to be able to do the things that you feel necessary to practice your culture. And so we've coded our attendance accordingly to make sure that it fits that. Rather than counting it as what's an unexcused absence because you should have been in school. We had stuff going on at school. We structured the leadership team at Lakeland differently to include more voices, as opposed to just one or two administrators, as opposed to just that teacher and everybody else is not a part of this. We've included rotating membership. We've added tribal representation from what we can tell is the first time ever in our decision-making process at the leadership level in our school to have a voice for what's happening in the tribal community, be a part of the decisions that are being made in our school. the implementation of a couple things that the tribe has also supported with us in collaboration is some funding, both for tutoring and Native American mentors. If Sam, you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so
What was the Indigenous Center PD?
I'll get to that. I'll come back to that in a second. Yeah.
we, the new Indian Education Ventures, so the tribe has funding that we use to support financially supporting one of the Indian Education Mentors. There are two. And so that allows us a lot of access amongst each other, like to share information, to communicate, to collaborate on issues within the school, to be able to get tribal help with, you know, if there's a particular student or whatever. We don't have those like roadblocks as far as like some of the privacy and information sharing. So we're able to very freely share information and provide assistance as necessary, work back and forth. That was a part of the process of hiring the individual who is in that role. And so we got, you know, to make sure that the tribe had a voice and we had the right person in the seat. And we're looking some more at making some changes as the focus to fit into this, but it's a great collaborative partnership between the tribe and the school. And then as far as the tribal youth center tutoring goes, we also financially support that. It's an after school program at our local youth center. It goes 2 nights. They've moved up to 3 nights a week now. It's very well attended by our local tribal students. It's 20+ students on any given night. And we have teachers directly from Lakeland Union High School who will come down onto the reservation at the youth center and provide the tutoring to students in the community, building relationships and helping make sure they're staying on task and getting their homework done. And it's wildly successful.
Additionally, our transition process. So we didn't allude to the demographics or the configuration was the word we use, the configuration, which we can get to a little bit as one of the roadblocks as well. But our school is a union district, which means our high school is a separate district from each of our elementary schools. There's only 10 in the state of Wisconsin. We are one of 10. We're the only one of the 10 that serves a tribal reservation as well. So all of our Lakeland Flambeau students, I should say the majority of our Lakeland Flambeau students go to school at an elementary school that is 99% Native American until they're in 8th grade. When they come to high school, they go from being the majority in a school setting to being the minority in a school setting for the first time in their educational experience. The transition to high school is tough enough as is for any student, but when these students are coming into the high school, they're coming into a place where historical trauma has reigned for generations before them. They're coming into a place, right, that is now off the reservation, that is not familiar territory for some of these kids. They're coming into a place where they don't see as many people that look like them in the school setting. That entire process creates a huge deal of trauma and a break in the system for all students, but an even bigger break for our Indigenous students. So the 8th grade transition process is our goal that we have started, is to try to incorporate ways to bring these students together earlier in their educational experience, so that they're getting accustomed to the different ways that high school works, the different people they'll be going to high school with. We have 2 of them coming up here in the next month and a half, where we bring the students to the high school and we do a lot of different team building activities. We do a lot of different, just get to know our building and what's available in our building. But these things aren't just in 8th grade as well. They trickle down into the other ages. Started this year with at the school force that was supported by the Voyager program, fourth graders. Fourth graders working together from all the different schools with our high school students leading some projects and activities just to get these students in a way to build collaboration earlier than when they come together first in high school. The Indigenous Center PD, a large partnership that we've had. Ricky White, who works for First Nations Consultants out of Fargo. Ricky has been a great friend of our school. And Ricky has come and kind of just put his arms around us and said, you know what, I'm going to help this school support all students. But I'm going to help you support all students by focusing on and being intentional about how we educate our tribal students. So bringing in cultural activities into our daily classrooms, not just saying like, hey, we're going to read a story about this. Well, we're going to read stories that involve traditional Ojibwe history. We're going to read stories that are about some of the stories that were told orally in our community, right? We're going to talk about some of the pieces of the natural environment around us as components of our educational experience. And in doing so, right, we're making what seemed to be a foreign aspect in our school be not a foreign aspect in our school, but part of our everyday life. Because it's been a part of the everyday life for our tribal students for a long time. And bringing that into this school has created an atmosphere in which it's okay to be Native. You belong. And prior to that, our students didn't feel like they belonged because they didn't hear their life being echoed by what was happening in our school. Thunderbird 20 is a new advisory period that we started this year because of the time that's spent in putting into consideration relationship building between all of our students, building connection to our school, right? We created an opportunity 20 minutes a day for our kids to connect with no other agenda, right? But build connections. As we've waited throughout the course of the school year, we're seeing some real great positives from that. We're also seeing some challenges that we're going to address this summer through some curriculum work in terms of saying, how do we bridge these gaps even more beyond just the small pockets of 10, 15 kids? How do we build it from 10 to 15 to these groups together? And so we're growing in that area. And finally, the Headwaters program is our behavior response program. We have a highly respected, we can call him an elder, in the tribal community, even though he is not a tribal member, that has built a ton of relationships with kids and families. And he's a behavioral support strategist for our school. Social worker by trade, but rather than our kids having some of these long lists of punishments and consequences that go with it, they get to meet with him and go through some alternative strategies. So looking at ways to improve, to change behavior, to modify behavior, or to modify our thinking about behaviors because it may have been from something that we weren't intentionally looking at. That process has created a soft landing for so many of our students because we noted the disproportionality, suspensions, expulsions that were much higher with our tribal students, that we need to address that in a way that was honoring of them, but also not compromising the integrity of our school's discipline process as well. And finally, the core value piece, we touched base on this core value piece as a school, saying like, what do we stand for? What are we about? And so we worked at looking into the components of a culture that we felt embodied who we were as a school or wanted to be as a school. If you notice on the graphic, right, the Thunderbird is at the heart of it. Thunderbird is our school mascot, right? But Aaron can tell you this, that in a conversation that we had sitting there in one of the pieces, our Thunderbird mascot was often referred to as a T-bird because it was easier. It was less word letters. It didn't take as long, whatever, right? And so the T-bird became the center, the Lakeland T-birds. Let's go T-birds. But as we dove into that a little bit more, the T-bird isn't representative of our native culture, our indigenous culture. The T-bird was a car, right? And we weren't a bunch of cars, right? We were representing the Thunderbird to the point where at one of our staff PD sessions, Fred and a few others shared some history of the Thunderbird and what the Thunderbird meant, in indigenous culture, to show why it was such a revered and powerful mascot to have for our school, as opposed to it being a T-bird. And so we've been intentional about placing the Thunderbird on everything that we've been doing. But our 4 core values that we narrowed down to was this idea that we wanted to build community. We wanted everybody to be accountable in that community. We wanted you to have respect for all the branches of the community. But in essence, is your energy needed to be plugged into every portion of that. And your energy didn't have to be something that fit into a box. Your energy is yours, but finding ways to put that into play for us. And so by being intentional about these core values, we've been able to change some of the language that goes around that, as opposed to telling a student, you are not this in the deficit-based model. We're talking about like, we'd love to see your accountability show more here, right? Being more asset-based in that approach through the use of these core values.
I guess I'll go over this part. This is kind of the Voyager program is in its terrible twos, I guess you can call it, because it's its second year. But it is something that the kids that we're all talking about are pictured here. These kids have had many obstacles in their career at Lakeland, to attendance, to discipline, to many different fractions, going to tribal court for truancy court and so forth. But we took upon them to express what their needs were. And through this program, we've implemented a lot of different perspectives. I'm not heavy-handed on the cultural, so the blend of cultural and realistic, I call it walking two roads. Is how do you function in society, so that we have that opportunity for them to show what it's like to live in two roads, because they have to survive. You can't focus all on culture sometimes. You have to have that blended mix so you don't have that resentment of a non-native discipline in you. So those are the teachings that we did. One of the teachings on the right there is community outreach, our community service projects. That right there is one of many snowstorms that we've had. And there's still snow up there, so y'all want to come up there. We went out in our community and shoveled. One of the things the kids said up there is, why am I doing this? I'm not getting paid. Why am I wasting my time? And we went over that, and I expressed to them is, why do you feel that way? And to bring it to perspective is how they view their lives. They've been taught to be self-efficient, and to do what only is best for them. But after they started doing this, that was a full day of actually doing this. They felt a lot better. They did more than we had to. I think that was like our 15th driveway that we did. And to have it posted on a Facebook page that represents our community, our neighborhood watch, they call it, to see over 200 plus comments saying, we need more of this. We need to see that more. Why do we see that? And I showed them that. And for them to acknowledge something that they haven't heard a lot is that a boy, that a girl, appreciate it, very proud of it. We need to do more of that. And I went in deep and more. I was like, what do you need change in our community? We need to see more positive from a teenager aspect. Okay, not adult. On the left there, we did a project just before Christmas. We go out and bow gather our treaty rights, and we all got permits. We went out and bow gather, and one of the things that we did, we went to our local AVW, which is our feeder schools, and this was the first grade, and we did we call them little mini gnomes, Santa gnomes that we hang on the doors, and the kids participated with first graders. At first, these kids, never really experienced something like that. I got to talk to somebody, and we said, just let them talk. They're going to be very curious. And to see them enjoying themselves and reverting into a teenager to experience what a first grader really wants and to learn. And that was one of the things that I was very proud of them that day, to acknowledge them in a proud and saying, way to go, appreciate it. They don't hear that enough. Express that. And that's one of the things that we're breaking that barrier down. One of the comments that I had in one of our Q&A questions from my class is that they feel welcome in the school. In my little room that we have, I call it the little reservation, because it's 90% of the kids in there are tribal or affiliated with tribal relations. So it's very important for them to even come to school. And a lot of these kids never wanted to come to school. Right now they're out harvesting. They just started our maple harvesting. This was in the fall. Well, actually, the middle one, we set nets on the lake. That was one of the young ladies that never experienced something like that. And that's a cultural thing that her family has done. So we harvest those fish, we cleaned them. They all cleaned about 400 fish. We smoked them all and we gave them to our elders and gave them to their family members. Greatly appreciated. The gentleman on the left, he's never speared our winter speared. And he was so excited to see that. And he had to show it off. I mean, that's up. And what we take is what we use. It's not catch and release. And that's some of the things that we learn in our community. And then on the right side, this young man here, he's an elder. He was a former chairman. This gentleman on the red there, George Nawago up in Red Cliff. We went up there and listened to him speak about how treaty rights are up there in the Great Lakes. That fishing boat right there is probably a 1964 boat, and they still fish out of it. And all the kids were listening to how he struggled, how he thinks, and to have those elders speak to him and telling it like it is. And he was telling it like it is. Oh, get off the damn bus. You need to get out there and listen to him. So, I mean, those things, these are the things that the kids really, I guess, starve for, because they haven't really heard it. And to have that experience, to go out to a different community and listen to elders like that, it's really important for them to understand what's out there for them.
And so just the overview, the program itself is a project-based, experience-based learning program that our students who enroll in this program can graduate high school because we've aligned all of the GED college ready standards to everything that we do in this program. Terrible too is we're still working through the details of of having our academic integrity held high with it. But these students came in as credit deficient, came in with background of school not being a place of great joy for them, to our attendance rates with this group of students is in the upper 80s to low 90s school year. And it's because we've taken the classroom that we said with the desks and the rows, and we've changed it. We've modified that into the point of saying, you're going to learn in a different way to provide them access to their education.
All right. So some of the complications to the project, there, of course, were many, but COVID-19 is an obvious one. We dealt with that in the middle. And not only was it difficult because we were not able to get together, but as you've heard, we had students who would participate, community members, and the access to Wi-Fi and good working Wi-Fi in the Northwoods is still pretty rare and not really existent. So that was sort of an unintended consequence of what we were dealing with.
Yeah, the configuration of our district, as I said before, is a bit difficult piece. We are the largest school district by land area in the state of Wisconsin, over 820 square miles. We, I believe, are the largest school district this side of the Mississippi River in terms of geographical land area. So we have students that get on the school bus that live potentially 2 hours away from some of their classmates that go to the same school because of how large our district is. With that being said, each of our elementary schools is its own separate district within our district as well. So we are a union district, so they function separately, but we try to work together as well. It creates great complications sometimes in going, because you have one school board that's representative for each of those districts. School boards sometimes are difficult to work with, but we have 6 of them, right, that we have to go through and work with as we present this situation. And so it's something that creates some interesting dynamics, but also some challenges for us as we go through this process. The other piece is the conservative backlash. We have a very large conservative base of thinking in the Northwoods, meaning that this is how it should be and it should always be this way. The fact that the 3 of us trekked down here to Madison, right? Oh my gosh, you're going to the big liberal city. Look out, we might try to change you, right? Is real in the eyes of the people that live in our community. In our conversations about the titles and in some of the language that we use in this presentation, we were careful to make sure that we were very neutral in some of our language, because there are people in our media that will take some of those things and spin it as the school's trying to press a different agenda. And so conservative backlash is a very real thing for us. But we also talked about it from the tribal side. There's conservative backlash on the tribal side saying, I don't care what the school does, we hate it because the school's the school. And so there's some conservative backlash as well from the tribal viewpoint that we have to deal with.
Home to me is that there's a lot of tribal members that go off and get college education and degrees, and ITA is former co-partner of the ITA program here at UW-Madison. I've seen kids come back to our reservation and struggle getting jobs because they have an education, a college degree, because we're looked upon as that differently, because we went off and seen a little bit of it, but in reality, you gotta know who you are and who you're going to be representing, because it's very, very difficult up in our community. If you don't have a big family, you might not get into that, or you have people that have many, many years into that program, and they're not going anywhere. So it's very difficult. And don't get me wrong, we as a tribal community focus on getting education, but coming back with an education is very difficult. And we're kind of, I guess it's called, my dad calls it the crab in the bucket. I was one of the crabs. This Maki over there got out of the bucket, and now they got the other crabs when they come back wanting to be equal. And that's a difficult part to have as educators. And me working at the high school, I get ridiculed sometimes because I look at it differently. It shouldn't be that way. You should be, favoriting the tribal kids. I'm not like that. I want everybody to succeed in our community. So it is a very difficult struggle to have an education sometimes in our communities. To have these type of things to get it where we need to go is provide service.
First, there are logistics. So configuring or collaborating with a 15-person team, trying to find a time that works for everyone when we know educators are burned out and navigating COVID and taking care of students at all hours. It's a real barrier to this work sometimes, and we especially struggle to have students have consistent attendance to our collaboratory meetings, and we recognize how important their perspectives and voices are. And then just the varying perspectives among a research team from UW and a research team who are practitioners and who are living in the Northwoods. How to move forward, coming together on what our goals should be, coming together even for this presentation on what language we should be using, what language is appropriate to speak about our work, are ongoing parts of this relationship that keep it moving.
So for outcomes, the perspective for the on the tribal side has been very different. There's been a lot more positive conversations surrounding the high school. People, giving shout outs on social media and positively referring to the school and their relationships, or talking about different individuals in the school that they work with and they have built relationships with. So we have seen a tremendous improvement in what I like to call the PR, which is a big issue between the tribe and the school. And a lot of that comes down to the changes that have been made and the school's effort to be present in the community, which the community has taken note of, and also an increased conversation on student belonging. So we've had some very fruitful conversations with tribal students who are expressing much more positive experiences as freshmen and sophomore students in the high school. And so we know that the things that are being done are trending us in the right direction from the tribal perspective.
Want to speak to school perspective on the bottom too?
Yeah, just so as a whole in school perspective, we have seen a greater increase in student sense of belonging through our school climate surveys. All of our students have shown a greater sense of belonging to our school over the course of the surveys. Our Indigenous students have shown an increase. I believe we went from a 54% sense of belonging to this point at the midterm point this year. We're at about 64%. So we've seen an increase in just that short amount of time of just feeling that there's a greater belonging. I think the biggest thing though is just this understanding and cultural awareness. And you can click to the next slide on this one. Is from our standpoint, is this work's going to continue, but the biggest things for us, right, have come from the avenue of there's so much to learn that it can't happen in one setting. It can't happen it's not a destination, right? It's a journey in this process. And so I look at that we have a picture of some of our students in the middle of a rice bed. Right? This is their classroom. This is what they're doing on a daily basis, right? These are the things that are bringing these students to school. And I can tell you the two kids in there, right? They didn't come to school prior to being a part of this program, right? On the other side, right, just example of flyer, right? Things like bringing here White in to teach our community as well as to what's going on, because we have growth and learning to do. I can tell you this, my first year coming to Lakeland and to work as an administrator, we were about 4 days before the first all staff in service day. And I received an invitation from Fred from his dad to invite a bunch of the new staff out to their home for a meal. And everybody said, yeah, well, you got to watch out. Mr. Maulson, he's intense. He's a former tribal chairman. He's got a great deal of ideas and thought process about what needs to happen, right? So I walk in as this green new administrator, like, okay, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to that, right? What's going to happen? And I remember sitting down, right? Walk in, open the home, right? Sitting down at the family table with about 20 people and having a meal, right? Fred and his nephew and his son had been out fishing that day. We had some fresh caught crappie, right? We had some fried bread tacos, right? We had some opportunity to sit down and enjoy a meal. But the part that struck me the most was Tom just sitting down in casual conversation. And I said, Tom, what can I do? What do you need from me? It's like nothing special. He goes, I want you to advocate for and love our kids. That's it. As a dad who has 2 daughters that go to school every single day, all I want is for the school to look out for the best interests of my kids and to love them. And so when I look at that, I'm like, there's nothing different here. But when we look at what education has become, when we look at sometimes the politicized process that we go through, we forget about the root of what education really is. It's not a classroom. It's not a building, right? It's about people, loving other people, helping them be better. As a school, right, we can say that we've made it, but that's not true. It's an ongoing process. It's a journey that happens. And every year, there's new kids, there's new families, there's new challenges. But we need to advocate for them. We need to love our kids. And that's the work that we're trying to do and continue to do.
So I'll just first let you know that I live and work in Ashland, and I serve the Bad River Valley Church as well. We have a little bit of snow up there. I'm avoiding tapping, but I hear the Ashland School District talking about these outcomes as goals. So how can we take your beautiful and important work and get it in front of our school board and get it in front of administrators? Hear other administrators like yourself speak to our administrator who just seems to spin his wheels and kind of just say there's really no way to do all that, but yeah, we agree that it's important. The second part of that question, is there any Act 31 accountability tracking or is that important? Is there, I think Act 31 is a lot of like, well, I come into the school, do some really important work with cultural content. I play Baga de Wewen with a group of high school kids. I've been doing it for 8 years. The school counts that as Act 31, but the kids are obligated to give up their lunch to do it. So it's not really like school time. So the Act 31 thing is really interesting.
Right now, for Act 31, as far as that question goes, no, there isn't a lot of teeth or tracking to it. But I can tell you that there are groups, including a pretty good faction of group of individuals working through WIEA who are working on that advocacy piece and have put some language together and are talking with folks at the state level to putting more teeth to the act, to adding that. So it's something that may come down in the future, but it's not there right this moment.
And so the partnership for sure, I think it's one of the reasons why we've done this work, right? It's one of the reasons why, because it works and it's good for us, right? Our goal is that we want to make it great for all kids. And so I would encourage anybody that wants to engage with us in this conversation to reach out, right? All of our contact information can be available on our website or through tribal website to be able to touch base. And it's like passionate about it, right? To put it on there is bring your energy. We're passionate about doing what's great for kids. And so 100%.
Great. Well, I'm tribal extension, and so I can play a role between communities. And there's a young man in your community who's also gifted at playing lacrosse and wants to bring that to the school district. So yeah, we just set him up with sticks, and he has the equipment now. So
let's
I
connect.
guess that's the first question. Can I come on down with a busload of kids and play lacrosse?
Let's share some contact information before you go, so we can make sure we connect that.
Thank you.
I'm curious if any of the other nations have they seen the work and reached out and asked to
I'm going to be presenting. We're going to be presenting at the WIEA conference, which is Wisconsin Indian Education Association, next month. So that'll be the first time that it's been brought specifically to an all native audience. And so what we'll share in the future.
Separately, I'm one of the principal investigators of the project with special education at Aydin. And as presented as travel relations director formerly at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And in part of my role, I would be presenting to the Great Lakes Intertribal Council, which doesn't have all the tribes, but they have many of the tribes. They can be monthly, and we present to them just on a variety of issues. And I did get the question, like, how did this school get selected? You know, they're kind of putting it rhetorically into the air. There's a question about, well, how did this happen? And why do we get, you know, how does it happen in other places? So we mentioned at the school selection site, the school has to want to work with this process. If the school doesn't want to work with this process, it can't go forward. So we were lucky that the principal superintendent, previous superintendent, Boucher, I think 2 superintendents ago, had wanted to figure out how to build school community relationships with his role. And so he wanted to do something. And so we need a willing school administrator, willing to think about, okay, we have to examine what we did. We have to map out the system that we have. And so it's like a year-long, kind of 9-month-long process of just mapping out your existing system to understand how you might improve upon it. And so you have to have a school district administration principal who's willing to do that work. We had approached other schools previous to going to Lakeland High School, and they turned us down. They had the issues. We really wanted to work in those school sites, but they were not at the place that they really wanted to pull the rug up, see what's going on, and do the work that follows that. And so, just a reminder, it takes tension in school. If everything's going well in school, the process doesn't work. You need tension and you need willingness. The model is already there. Learning labs in Finland, in Brazil, Florida. The entire Miami school district is doing a massive learning lab as a school district. So this really useful kind of model of a 9-month facilitated meeting process is the learning lab, right? It just takes willing participants who want to go into a learning lab. And so you have to have tensions or disproportionate outcomes in your school. Because if your outcomes are all great in this process, it's probably not going to change. But just a little bit about some methodology and stuff.
Just on the poster, just advertising the talk with the evening with that the guy from Fargo says, you know, what's good for Native American students is good for all students, and I wonder what kind of outcomes you've seen for either for like students who aren't Native because of this, or like relationships, engagement between Native and non-Native students because of this. Yeah.
So one of the things that we've done, it's in the spring here at World Culture Week, as a part of our World Language Department, kind of has put some things on. And typically we have a very strong Spanish teacher and a very strong German teacher. And so they put a lot of thought and time into that process. Well, over the course of the last few years, our students have really pressed our Ojibwe language teacher and our to incorporate more culture into the Ojibwe culture, where we had an entire day devoted to Ojibwe culture. At lunchtime, there were different exhibits. One of our, it's so impressive. One of our students who, she was a phenomenal basketball player, great student, right? She's sitting there with birch bark making baskets in our field house, and some of her classmates are sitting there watching her work, saying, like, "This is amazing, right? We didn't know this was a part of who she is," and just giving her that platform to do so. The winter games that have taken place, right? We're playing some of the traditional Ojibwe winter games that have taken place, where our students get to experience some of that cultural life, but in our daily activities. So it's become a tradition as a part of what we're doing now on a consistent basis. And I think the respect level that we've seen from some of our kids going through that, they understand it a little bit differently now. So yeah, there's lots of different opportunities with food. One of the places of incorporation, though, that I would feel like is one of those next steps is incorporating some of the traditional Ojibwe foods into our foods classes, into our culinary arts, and some of the different things that take place. We're not at that level yet, but it's like kind of continuing to dig deeper.
And to further that point, so this summer I had a get together with some students who were getting ready to be high school seniors, some girls, and one of the Native American student mentors. We got several girls together and we spent the day together. And I asked them, what are you looking for from the school? What do you want out of your senior year? And one of the students just sat there for a moment and said, I want to feel like that there's an adult in the building that I can trust. This is the most simple, most basic desire that the student was expressing, and they were going into their senior year. And clearly we're lacking that relationship. And so now you look at that T-Bird 20, and yeah, it's bonding, 10 or 15 students together, but it's also creating these very unconventional partnerships between tribal students and non-tribal staff. And so you have, I know of a science teacher and a young freshman girl, that I'm good friends with their mom, and they have this hilarious bond that no way are they getting without that intentional relationship building piece. And, staff members going through medical situations and tribal students sharing their cultural perspectives and prayers, and they're having these beautiful moments that exist just because the idea of building a relationship got put on not just the conversation, but something that you made time for every single day. So yes, I'm sure it does help with the connections among students, but it also helps them with the connections among staff.
It's just going to add a little piece. We had this really powerful professor in the School of Education who retired a little while ago, or left our school. His name is Adam Gamera. And Adam really studied educational inequality. And the greatest inequality isn't between classrooms or between schools, it's within one classroom. Who is acknowledged? Who's encouraged? Who's discouraged? And so inequality happens greatest within a single classroom of how a teacher engages with students. And our students had said they feel like their teachers did not want to know them. And so the restructuring the day, cutting time out of lunchtime, doing all sorts of stuff to afford an opportunity for every student in the school to try to make a meaningful relationship with an educator in that building and within their own peer group. And we're fortunate as research people to come up and witness these interventions as they're being implemented. And so I got to go into a T-Bird 20 classroom and see how no Indigenous students in that classroom, but this one teacher had made a symbolic fire that they brought out for T-Bird Day, and all the students gathered around it, and they reflected and shared about how they are experiencing the world as human beings. And so just an incredible amount of community created through the T-Bird 20 intervention for all students within the school. So kind of think about those all student outcomes, and that not all students are Indigenous in the Voyager program. So trying to make these really fundamental connections for all students.